I think we're at 12:01. I think some more participants are going to be joining us soon, but we have to make hay while the sun shines. So we're going to take advantage of the people who are here now. Welcome to the very first of a series of OTL webinars that we're going to have over the course of the spring 2021 semester. Some of you already know me. I am Michael Zimmerman. I'm a assistant professor in the anthropology department, and this spring's new 2021 OTL fellow. So for those of you who have arrived here to watch me fall flat on my face, I hope you enjoy yourselves. That's possibly what is most likely going to happen, but we will see how things go as we progress. I would like to note that this session is being recorded, as Lori stated in the chat, so that folks can come in and view it later. So everyone's going to have access to that. I also want to take a moment before we begin to talk about some other exciting and upcoming things for this semester at the Office of Teaching and Learning. So a couple of things that we are seeing is not just that we're going to have a series of OTL webinars, such as this one on managing student and faculty workload during the pandemic, but additional upcoming webinars on a series of different topics on student engagement and others. I would like to mention on January 25th, our very own OTL director, Cindy Strong, is going to be leading an OTL pedagogy potluck, basically a noontime informal discussion on the idea of what students can do, or sorry, what faculty can do to put their best foot forward in the spring 2021 semester. And I'd also like to mention that OTL drop-in office hours begin on Monday the 25th. My office hours are Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9 to 10. Cindy's are from 11 to noon on Monday and 3 to 4 on Wednesday. And fellow OTL, fellow Andrea Kaysen, is going to be on Monday from 3 to 4 and Wednesday from 11 to noon. And I'm going to be putting those in the chat right now. Oops. All righty. So thank you for all of you who have joined in. Christine, hi, good to see you.
You too.
Thank you. And always excited to see all of my wonderful friends here at the BSU faculty. So I have a couple of things that I'd like to do, just sort of to jump in informally, a few questions to begin with. So one of the things I've done is I put together a Padlet for those of you who have used Padlet before at these at the OTL December conference or in other forums. This is a good opportunity to use it. It's also a great pedagogical tool for your classrooms as well. So I am going to share the link for the Padlet in the Zoom chat right now. And then I'm going to share my screen so we can see the Padlet in real time and focus on sort of the questions I'd want to address in this forum. So for these questions, you can either raise your hand and unmute yourself. You can provide information in the chat, or you can add to the Padlet as you see fit. And this will remain up throughout the semester as a resource for everyone. So let's begin with sharing our screen. So here is the Padlet. This is one of my absolute favorite classroom backgrounds as a Star Wars nerd. I absolutely love the Star Trooper writing out, "These are the droids you're looking for," over and over and over again, while the Emperor sort of goes over his grading. So there are three main questions. So first of all, can everybody see the shared screen? Excellent. So there are three main questions that I sort of wanted to ask those of you who have attended today. Number one is, what challenges have you faced in managing your students' workload, as well as your own? Number two is, have you found that the use of online pedagogical tools, stuff like Flipgrid and Padlet, which we're using here, has decreased student workload and faculty workload, or has it increased it? And question number three, which would be the last one we would address, what are some possible solutions for effectively managing student and faculty workload without negatively affecting learning or without lowering standards? So I will just open the floor out to anyone who wants to jump in. You can raise your hand and unmute yourself. You can type into the Padlet, into the chat, however people want to do it. So who shall be so brave and so bold as to first share some of the challenges that they've had?
I had a thought on question 2.
Sure.
I've found that it's increased workload for both students and faculty to have these kind of fun, engaging online tools, because there's also, I have to communicate how to use it. Typically, students are going to be at different levels with their comfort, especially in recording themselves in videos. And so I found that it takes a lot more time and work on both ends than I expected to, but I've still found it really worth it in that kind of building engagement and community aspect.
Absolutely agreed. And I think that the management of these kind of online tools, they're incredibly useful online tools. They're great online tools. But I think that one of the things that a lot of faculty have been tempted to do is to use a lot of them, to jump in and say, oh, there are all these great tools. There's Kahoot and Flipgrid and VoiceThread and all of these other great tools that I can use to build engagement. There are discussion boards on forum. There are breakout groups in Zoom. There are all of these great things. But I think we sometimes forget that when we use a lot of these tools, it can be often overwhelming for students. Has anybody found the use of these online tools also difficult for their own workload? Have they found themselves struggling or overloaded through the use of these online tools?
I'll say yes to that. I played a little bit with Flipgrid over the summer during the OTL summer boot camp that we were doing. And I guess when I adopt a new technology, I like to I like to know like 95% how it works. So I try to get in there and try to break it sometimes too. Not like, hack it, but like try to figure out how I can mess it up. But that takes a lot of time, just trying to like play around with it and then think about, well, how am I going to use this in my class? So I think I hesitate to adopt a new technology during a semester because I generally don't have the time to put into that. But I'd love to hear any tips about like maybe diving in quicker if anyone has any.
Open the floor to anybody who has any tips. I can tell you that I experienced something similar. Something like Flipgrid, for example, was very, very intuitive, very easy to understand. And with the Summer Online Teaching Institute, I was really able to develop how to use it. There were two main issues that I'd found. One having to do with student comfort and the other having to do with faculty workload. With student comfort, really the problem that they had was access. They couldn't always, depending on what platform they were on, what computer they were using, were they on an Apple, were they on a Chromebook, were they off their phones, could they access the Flipgrid? So I found that just embedding it into the course Blackboard page wasn't enough. I had to give them the QR code. I had to give them the join code. I had to show them how to access the app. So really improving student access is a great way to just kind of do this. In terms of the other thing that I found, in terms of faculty workload, I had 2 full speaking intensive classes last semester. So I thought to myself, oh, I'll use Flipgrid. This is great. Students can do their oral presentations on Flipgrid. They can comment, and then I can go in later and grade. And I'll have all of this time in class to cover content and material and have all these great discussions. And that all of that happened to be true. But I also found that it took up so much more of my time than I thought it would to do the grading for these oral presentations, because when you're grading them in class, you're using class time to judge your students' oral presentations and judge their progress. Having to do that additionally outside of the classroom just took up so much more time than I was expecting it to. I also see a couple of people posting in the chat and in question number 1, some challenges. Let's start with Sherry. Challenge number 1, student engagement. If I do a synchronous lesson, students may or may not show up, so student attendance drops off. And challenge 2 is the workload related to grading. So Sherry, I was wondering if you might want to unmute yourself and sort of expand on what you've experienced regarding those challenges.
Hi, hang on a second. I have 3 screens open and they're not all lined up with the mouse, so I'm trying to find it. So I guess for the first challenge, I've tried doing the synchronous learning and have basically found that students may or may not stay on. They really want a synchronous lesson, but then all of a sudden they drop off, or they'll, like I do on this, you turn your camera off and you think that they're there. So I guess more around student engagement within, say, a 45-minute to an hour time period.
Yeah.
How to get them to participate.
Well, I can share with you some of the methods that I've used, and I'd like to also open up the floor to all of our other participants today to offer that. I can tell you that some of the things that I have done to improve student engagement, student engagement is tied to personal interactions with their instructor. It's tied to how much fun the class is, but most specifically and especially, it's tied to grades. So increasing grades as they relate to attendance and class participation is one possible avenue to take. Also, another way to both reduce faculty workload and also to improve student engagement is to create fun activities that can be done in the classroom during class time. So for example, at the December OTL conference, one of the things that I talked about was gamification. And one of the things that I did as a online sort of fun activity using Zoom breakout rooms, and I would do this in person whenever we covered theory, was to create a gamification exercise. Now, this is across multiple disciplines. If you've ever taught theory in the classroom before, there's one sort of common element to almost every single class that I've taught or class that I've seen that deals with theory, and that common element is yeah. A lot of students don't find theory very, very challenging, and also sometimes a little slow and boring. So one of the things I do to gamify it is I take different aspects of theory and I divide it up into sort of different camps. And then I have students research a particular, with my background being archaeology, they research a particular archaeologist, and then the students have to interact with one another within the breakout rooms and vote each other into different groups based on the theoretical background of the person or scholar that they've been assigned. So this is just one example of ways to both engage students and also reduce student workload and faculty workload, because these are activities that are being done and being graded that are inside the virtual classroom as opposed to extra work that's being done on the outside. But I also want to open up the floor to anyone else who has suggestions regarding student engagement in synchronous classes.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that?
Sure.
What you're doing for the gamification. So you were saying that, I was trying to type at the same time, you basically take a theory and you break the students into different camps. And then you were saying they would vote each other into different groups. How so? Like,
Well,
what does that look like?
Well, one of the things that that you can do, there are a couple of different options. You can do it asynchronously by using Flipgrid or by using discussion forums. You can also do it using Zoom breakout rooms. So for example, one of the things I'll do is, not to give a primer on archaeological theory, but I'll create 4 breakout rooms. There's the cultural historical approach, the ecological approach, the processual approach, and post-processual approach. And then I'll just randomly assign students to those breakout rooms. And what I'll then be able to do is go into each of the breakout rooms where students are having this discussion, basically introducing themselves or role-playing themselves as those archaeologists. And they'll vote and they'll say, well, you really should be in the breakout room on the ecological approach. So what'll happen is then that student is asked to exit that breakout room and go into the main room and say, hey, everybody voted me out and I now have to go to this breakout room because this is where my archaeologist or my theorist belongs. To add to the sort of fun of it, one of the things I also do is I give some students names of some different pseudo-archaeologists. If you've ever seen Ancient Aliens on the History Channel, you know, the one that, you know, that show that every time a commercial for it comes on, I bleed out of my ears slightly, you know, I just have a minor aneurysm for a moment. So, and then students have to sort of suss out who the pseudo-archaeologists are and exile them. And that creates something that's very fun for students. That can be something to be very engaging for students. But for workload, it's also very important because it's something that can be done in class. Now, again, this can be done asynchronously using Blackboard discussion boards or using Flipgrid, which is what I did with it last semester. But there are a lot of great options to create fun in-class exercises that can maintain standards, engage students, and also reduce faculty workload, because then if it's being done in class, then you're not spending X amount of time going through video after video or discussion board post after discussion board post to grade your students' work on these activities. And I find, I can't see who posted it, but I do see something under question number 1 in the Padlet. And I desperately want to be able to help this person because they have in all caps at the end, exclamation point help. So I want to make sure I address that. So
Michael,
I am
that's me.
That's you, Melissa.
Yeah, I'm not a grader.
You're my favorite
usually.
people in the world. I'm so thrilled that I'm able to help you.
Yeah, I'm not a grader usually. Like I prioritize feedback, but I don't know if it's this environment. I just feel like if I don't show them that I've read every little thing, I'm driving myself crazy. So yes, please help.
I think there are a couple of ways that you can do that. When you're doing your grading, what sort of assessments are you primarily find yourself devoting the most time to in terms of grading?
I think it's the smaller, like weekly things. So like a discussion board or a Padlet. We use Padlet slots for discussions.
So the formative assessments.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the formative stuff. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's the stuff that can really sort of lead to overgrading. And yeah, I find that takes up a lot of time as well. I think there are a couple of things that can lead to that overgrading. One is using multiple online resources. If you're doing both Padlets and discussion board forums, you're sort of doubling up on that. You're doubling up on that. It's sort of like going out to a restaurant and saying, oh, I think I'll order this. Oh, but this also looks good, so I should have that. Oh, and I gotta save room for dessert too. Next thing you find yourself over full and overeating. I've been guilty of that, both in terms of overgrading and also overeating, especially during the stress of the pandemic. So reducing yourself to one of those resources, either discussion board or the Padlet, is a great opportunity. Another way to reduce grading is to create systems for peer review. Have students grade themselves. When it comes to something as informal as a Padlet or something as informal as a discussion board, it's very easy to see which students are engaging and which students are not engaging. So focusing in on grading those students who have engaged and getting students who have not engaged to do so, I think should be the primary focus over responding to every single post. You shouldn't need to respond to every single post in a Padlet or every single post in a discussion board. You will drive yourself up around the bend, right? So responding to some key posts and also opening up and saying, what do other students think? Because ostensibly, if you're doing a Padlet or you're doing a discussion board, other students can see your responses to other students. So you can respond to one student or two students to say, well, this is a great post you've made. The question that I would ask you to expand on is this. Can you or anyone else offer some interesting ideas in this? And then you have only one thread or one student conversation or discussion area to focus in on, rather than all of it, which can get so overwhelming so fast.
Can I ask a couple questions? So I'm not using
That's what this is
Padlet.
for.
What?
That's what this whole
Okay. So I'm not using Padlet and the discussion board in the same week, right?
Mhm.
But I do sometimes switch back and forth because I find them useful in sort of different ways, which I know can be annoying. What I don't like about Padlet's my favorite because it's so visual, but it doesn't have a good grade, it doesn't have the feature that Blackboard does where you can see one student and all their responses. So then I find if I want to take a look at is Michael responding on the Padlet, then I'm control Fing for your name on the Padlet. And then it's going all over the place showing me, where you've posted or whatever, which can get really hard. So yeah, but I like this. I like your idea a lot of peer review. I want to just ask a question, which is there a way in Blackboard for students to get an alert? I can ask Eric too if none of us know, but when we professors post in the discussion, because I find I'll post and then some students, they posted within the first 2 days of the week or whatever. And I know I could assign it differently, post this by Wednesday, post this by Sunday or whatever. But some of my students are grad students. That's not going to happen. They're teaching full time during the week. So is there a way that students know, oh,
I don't know if anybody else knows. I can tell you I do not. So that would probably be a question for Tim or Eric.
My students tell me they don't see my responses, which then frustrates me. I'm like, why am I? I'm writing back to you with these thoughtful questions and nobody sees them. Yeah. So, okay, interesting.
I think the alert question would be one for Tim or Eric. I think if they indicate that there's no way to sort of discriminate between the different alerts that students get on Blackboard, I'd imagine that there would be a way. We have a raised hand from Christina.
The only thing that I could think of is if you can ask students to subscribe to that forum. That way, anytime someone posts, then at least they get some type of alert. That's the only way I could think of. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much, Christina. No, that's a great suggestion. If you want ones that are specifically instructor focused, that would be a question for Tim. Another option, and it's a little sort of a workaround, but another option is, the announcements section of the Blackboard page. You can send out announcements to all students in the class saying, hey, I just posted in this forum, come by and check it out. Now, if you're posting a lot, you might not want to do that because that would be that would create a lot of work very quickly. But if you are, like I said, only posting responses to 1 or 2 things, then that might be a good workaround. So I see another item coming into the Padlet right now, but I just want to check the chat. I love the quote here, Alyssa, don't spend more time grading assignment than they've spent preparing the assignment. That's a very, very good tip. It always depends on which of our students are preparing the assignment. Different students have different levels of preparation. And I also want to take a moment in the chat to point out that Cindy Keene wonderfully posted a recording of a webinar from last semester from Andrea about student engagement. And so that's available at the OTL YouTube page right now. So it should be available for everybody. So under challenges, slow grader. Under normal conditions, I struggle to grade labs and exams in a timely manner. Virtual classes have exacerbated this problem. Extra points for the use of the word exacerbate, one of my favorite words of all time. It's also a fantastic joke in the movie Shaun of the Dead. They actually create a joke around the word exacerbate. I highly suggest it. Maybe it's because I'm not dragging around piles of paper anymore. That's entirely possible. It also depends on what your grading system is in terms of faculty workload. I can tell you from my own personal experience that I've taught a lot of speaking intensive and writing intensive classes. So I can tell you about my frustrations regarding grading experiences there. I already told you a little bit about the speaking intensive classes and how it sort of exacerbated when I created this way of students to post their oral presentations using Flipgrid. With regards to writing intensive classes, the philosophy that I've always taken is that it's so incredibly important if we want to focus on improving our students' learning vis-a-vis writing, that we need to provide them as much feedback as possible. But what that creates is it creates a major workload for faculty, especially if you're doing a bunch of smaller papers and you're continually trying to get as much feedback to students as possible. And with me, that became an incredible burden in terms of workload, because I would allow students multiple revisions. In terms of, I don't know what everybody else's experiences are in terms of writing, but guaranteed in terms of writing, 99% of the time, you work really hard on a paper, you get it back to a student. 99% of the time, what is the student going to do with that paper that you've just handed back to them and that you worked on for a whole lot of time to give them as much feedback as possible? 99% of the time, it goes where
You're going to get nothing, or the students will just complain about what you said.
Yeah.
About your comments. That's what happens to me.
Or it's going to go in the trash, never to be seen again. Or it's going to go somewhere in somebody's book bag or bag, again, never to be seen again. And it will come out at the end of the semester when they finally decide to excavate the various strata of the inside of their book bag. I had to throw an archaeological reference in there so you knew it was me. So creating that sort of feedback system that allows students to revise and improve their grade has really, really helped students in terms of adapting to their grading, but it's created this very, very intense workload. So some of the things that I do is I create a shorthand for my grading, particularly for comments, and I post that shorthand on my course Blackboard pages so that students know that if there's a mark or a bracket next to something and it says, CL, they can go to a code on Blackboard and they can say, oh, this means there's an issue with clarity. The student, the professor didn't quite understand the sentence, or I need to make what I'm saying more clear. Or CIT, right? That means, oh, I forgot to cite here. Right? There was a citation needed. So creating that kind of shorthand turned out to be very helpful in terms of reducing time. I also post that shorthand on the grading rubrics for my papers as well. In terms of my experience, in terms of grading labs, I cannot help you. I don't know if there are any other physical sciences professors who can offer some advice in those areas, but I can tell you that developing that sort of shorthand and overall finding a way to create a way to give students as much feedback as possible without creating too much work for yourself is a very, very delicate balance. And I think it takes a lot of time and a lot of practice to be able to do. But I don't know if there's anybody else here from the physical sciences who would have a suggestion regarding grading labs.
Not from the physical sciences, but I wanted to maybe share something I learned in the summer institute, which I had never heard of before, which was the single point rubric that can, I don't know if it would work for a lab, but I think it, could work somewhat across disciplines, where instead of having like a rubric with a grid with like 25 different things on it, you just have, okay, here are the criteria I'm looking for, and here's what, say, a B paper would be. So it would have, a clearly identifiable argument, specific textual evidence, citations, NEMLA style, or something like that. And so you basically only write one column worth of criteria. And so if they meet that criteria, you kind of check off that column. If they're not meeting that criteria, then you could write about that specific aspect in the left-hand column. If they're exceeding that, like they have a particularly original or insightful argument, you could write about that in the right-hand column. And it's something I'm still experimenting a little bit with how I use it for different assignments in different classes, but it just seemed like a very good and efficient idea to me when I came across it for the first time.
Awesome.
So do you leave the columns blank on either side? And
yeah, you can do, or like what I've also done, because I don't necessarily always have an actual grid rubric, is I'll say, a B paper worth this much will do the following. An A paper will exceed these expectations in one or more areas. C paper will need improvement in one or more areas, something like that. So there are different ways you can write it. But yeah, the idea is you would just write criteria in one column.
thank you.
And I'd like to mention that Melissa Winchell wonderfully provided us with the URL for the single point rubric and information regarding that in what I think is possibly one of the coolest website names ever, Cult of Pedagogy, which I absolutely love. Yeah, I best URL ever. And it's podcast too. Oh, I absolutely love it. Is there anybody else, and just to get off topic for a second, is there anybody else who misses having a commute where they can listen to podcasts? Because I can't have a podcast or something like that on while I'm working, but it was my little half hour, it was my little like 45 minutes of Zen was listening to podcasts on my commute from BSU to my home before I got to come home to a then 5-year-old and the ensuing chaos that 5-year-old had created. Yeah, does anybody else miss podcasts in a big way? Christine? Miss TED Talks, WGBH, not the two, oh my God, Gail, you had a 2-hour round trip commute? Oh, you poor thing. I can't even imagine what that's like in New England, in Massachusetts traffic. Ooh. But yeah, the podcasts are great. There are a couple of fantastic ones that I miss. Well, there's a really, really fun one called Pessimist's Archive. Have you heard of that one? I heard about it because I used to listen to the Backstory podcast at the University of Virginia about basically the American history and the history behind modern headlines. It was a great podcast. But there's this great one I found called Pessimist's Archive that is all about the history of people's reactions to emergent trends and emergent technologies. So for example, you may not have known that in history, there was a major cultural backlash and cultural panic associated with, among other things, the teddy bear and recorded music. Yeah, I'm not kidding. So yeah, that's a real fun one. So Christine, I saw you'd unmuted yourself there for a second. I didn't know if you had anything that you wanted to
I
add.
just want to comment. I didn't know that about the teddy bear or recorded music. That's hilarious.
It's absolutely hilarious. Like with recorded music, no greater luminary than John Philip Sousa said that it would destroy modern music. And the teddy bear is fascinating because it was all about, there was this moral argument that because the teddy bear was one of the first sort of non-gendered toys, that it would make women, because little girls were turning away from their dolls, it would make women no longer want to become mothers. So it was this really sort of Byzantine backwards kind of argument. So really, really fun. Sherry asked, what was the name of the website? Are you referring to the podcast or the website for the single point rubric?
I think it was the pessimistic, or the one you just mentioned.
The Pessimist's Archive.
Thank you.
Pessimist's Archive. I love it. That's one of my favorites. I miss it. But back to the topic. Before we move on, I wanted to ask a little bit more about question 2, which we jumped into question 2, then we went back to challenges. I'd like to jump back into question 2 just for a second. Has anybody found that these online pedagogical tools have increased or decreased faculty workload? I know that Alyssa, you'd said that they felt that they had increased workload. Has anybody felt that they've decreased workload or been useful to improve grading or dealing with student workload?
Actually, I do have one example of how I guess teaching remotely has decreased my workload slightly. So I record my lectures and then I post them to Blackboard afterwards. And so I had far fewer students saying, oh, I missed last lecture. What did we cover? Could you give me a summary? It's like, it's on Blackboard, just go see it. And I actually had a few students comment that even if they were in class that day, they would still go see the recordings, because if I was talking about a topic that they didn't really understand, they wanted to go back to that point in the lecture and then just rewatch it and try to get it a second time. So I think it actually did maybe decrease some of the work I was doing to like help students understand certain topics, because they were able to teach themselves.
Right. And I think that also leads into a couple of things. Number one, I'd say when you're posting the Zoom recordings, because I made this mistake a couple times, one of the defaults is for there always to be a password for the Zoom recordings. So I always have to go in there and uncheck the default so that students can access it using just the link. The other thing that is that I found, sorry, I just had a little brain moment there for a second and forgot what the other thing I was going to say. The other thing that I think that has been useful for students is the creation of very, very small sort of mini lectures, just 2 to 3 minute videos that can be posted directly to Blackboard and can be uploaded on YouTube. Students have found that incredibly useful as well. In terms, I also wanted to open up another question. A lot of students have found their workload outside of the classroom increasing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I've had more than a few students who work in grocery stores or who work in assisted living centers or other essential services, and have found that their workload outside of the classroom, their day-to-day work life, has increased, doing double or sometimes even triple shifts in addition to going to school. Has anybody else heard similar stories from their students and have any ideas with regards to how to maintain standards while still allow students who are now suffering under this much heavier burden to succeed?
My children all work at grocery stores during the pandemic, and one of them just finished college and one is still in college. She is required to work a minimum of 15 hours a week, but no more than that. And her friends have said, oh, I better take as many hours as I can, and then I'm going to tell my teacher that I have to take as many hours as I have to. So they may not necessarily have to as far as working goes. They may want to as far as earning money or income goes, but having to work 40 or 50 hours is not necessarily a requirement of having the job, just to let you know that.
Oh, no, absolutely. Absolutely. But we also have to bear in mind the financial stresses that our students are under if they can't get a job, or if they have a job and can't afford to say no to these extra shifts and extra hours that they're being offered. BSU is in a unique position in that we have so many first-generation college students, so many students from disadvantaged backgrounds, so many commuter students, so many students of color, that it's important that we take into account the needs of our students outside of the classroom and apply that to student workload, while also maintaining our standards and ensuring that students can meet the learning objectives that we've set for them. So, oh, sorry, Melissa, go ahead.
I didn't want to interrupt you, so.
No, that's okay. I had the thing that the thing that had disappeared as a result of the brain fart came back, so I'm writing it down now so I can deal with it after we discuss. So Melissa, go ahead.
Okay, I just posted a couple things under question 3 on the Padlet. One that I use a lot, especially in this online environment, is called Jigsaw, which is great for breaking up even a reading, so if there's like a whole chapter of the textbook that we want students to read, and frankly, we know our students are often not going to read the whole chapter. So better to break it up maybe into 4 pieces and assign the 4 sections to 4 different group of students. And then when they come for a live class, or if they're fully online, they discuss it in their groups in some ways and then participate with the others who read the other sections. The thing I posted there will explain it better. But I find that kind of chunking out, all right, instead of students doing the whole reading or reading all 5 articles I really want them to read this week, can I assign an article to a few students and then provide a forum for them to hear what the other students learned in the other articles? So that's been really helpful. And then I also just put down there, one thing I remembered in a moment of desperation last semester is that we don't always have to design everything ourselves. I got to, I don't know, it was probably like week 9 or 10. And I was like, oh my God, there was this topic I knew I needed to teach, but I hadn't really taught it before. So I was like, no, I got to start from scratch and go curate all these resources. And finally I was like, I don't have time for this. So I just asked them to curate the resources basically. So they went looking for the content. I obviously gave them some parameters. They posted the content to Padlet. They summarized and annotated that content. And then the next week, after everybody had created the content, students went back and did some things that I assigned to them with that content. But it was just a refreshing reminder for me that sometimes I am working way, way harder than my students are. Not sometimes, a lot, I find, and that I could like chill, and that they'll learn more actually, right? The more they're engaged and the less I'm like doing things for them, the better it is for their learning. So anyway, just through those, and I put up another great cult of pedagogy resource too around class discussions. You'll see that on the Padlet as well.
Right. So Melissa, I hope everybody can see it. I did put up the PDF. Can everybody see the PDF that I clicked on? So that shows the Jigsaw method. I didn't know what it was called, but I've actually used this method in my classroom myself. In my myth and culture classes, You know, there'll be different modules with different themes. And what I'll do is there'll be multiple myths that we'll cover, but we'll divide students into groups, and then each group will get a different reading, and we'll have to present on that reading and open up discussion with other students. Again, reducing faculty workload in that area as well. There's something else that I wanted to cover that Alyssa just put into the chat, but I know that Sherry also had her hand up, so I wanted to give her a chance to speak as well.
So one thing that actually two things that I do, Michael, I kind of do the same thing where I'll break out a chapter or a concept, and then even though it's just a small piece, the students have to do like one PowerPoint lesson on it with some audio, and then they can upload it, and then the students can go through. And what I've been doing too, because I work with in continuing education as well, is a lot of students that I have might work an overnight shift or multiple jobs, or they're taking multiple classes. And maybe you guys already do this, but I'll set the module up like first thing Monday morning and then leave it open for them all week. And they seem to be super grateful for that. I close it at midnight, Sunday night, so they have that week to do it. And for those people that are working, it really seems to make a huge difference, because I've had a lot of panic emails. Oh, when's this due? When's this due? And so I've modified my modules to help organize, like, this is what's due, this is what's being graded, this is not being graded, but it might show up on a quiz, so make sure you do it. And it closes, you know, Sunday evening, so they can manage their own time and their own classes.
Excellent. So another thing that I wanted to bring up, and this is something that Alyssa has talked about in the chat. Alyssa posted a online tool from Academic Coaching called College Theory 168, where students can break down how they use their time and help them create a more sustainable workload. And this dives into an element of OTL that you can see on the OTL webpage called metacognition, the idea of helping students learn how to learn, helping them figure out how to use their time more efficiently and how to develop efficient ways of using their time most effectively so that they are not overburdened with their workload. So please check out the link in the chat. I'd also like to, at the end of the Zoom session today, I'd also like to save the chat, if that's all right, and include that in the Zoom recording as well. You can coordinate this through the Academic Achievement Center and so forth and so on. So thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Alyssa, for, did I say Alyssa twice? Or thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Alyssa. And thank you, Sherry, for all of your input in this area. So Cindy also has another tool to share. There's a course workload estimator from Rice University that you can use to estimate the amount of work that you're giving your students. So the URL for that has also been posted in the chat, as well as other information. One thing I did want to share with you before we move on to wrapping things up, because we only have 10 minutes left before 1, is I wanted to share with you some of the ideas that I had put together prior to this forum today, and also to sort of add in addition to the various things that we've talked about today and the wonderful input that you have all provided for us. So one of the things that we can do, and everybody can see the link right now that we put together. So this is a SWAY newsletter that we've put together that includes information like managing student workloads. So there are a couple of things that we can do. One of these, and it's very, very it seems very simple to say it, but it's very important to say it, which is make sure that you clearly state your expectations to your students in the form of course objectives and learning objectives for your course. State it in your syllabus, state it in Blackboard, go over it at least once at the beginning of the semester in your synchronous classes if you're teaching synchronously. Hire a skywriter to put them across the sky if you can. Whatever you can, students need to be very, very clear about what they're expected to know at the end of the semester. Nesting these into different macro level or course level student outcomes, and then smaller micro level student outcomes for each module can be very, very useful. And these are the things that we've talked about, for example, at the summer OTI. We went over them in detail. Another thing that's incredibly important, I loved the workshop that you did, Melissa, on creating an accessible and diversified syllabus. I think that the kind of syllabus that you put together is great for student engagement. I think it's exactly the type of syllabus that we should be making. And as you stated, also the kind of syllabus that administration and chairs should warm to a lot more than the more traditional academic syllabus. I would say that possibly the most important thing to put in your syllabus that can help students is offer information on student resources. The Academic Achievement Center, include information and URLs on your Blackboard site and on your syllabus for tutoring services, one-on-one academic coaching, the writing studio, the math studio, the finance and accounting lab. And because of the stresses of the COVID-19 pandemic, also the counseling center as well. This is all information that should be made readily available on your syllabus to help students along with what they need to deal with. I actually found this morning that, and I found also throughout my time here at BSU, that a lot of students are still unaware of a lot of the resources that we have. This morning, one of the things that I was one of the faculty who is phoning students who have not yet registered for the spring 2021 semester. And one of the things that I found, both among students who plan to come back right away and those who plan to come back once the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic has become better, is that a lot of them were unaware of the resources available to them. A lot of them said, email me information and the URL for the Academic Achievement Center. I had students who didn't know that BSU had a counseling center. I've talked to students who didn't know that these are juniors that I've been calling, who didn't know that there was an Academic Achievement Center, who didn't know that there were counseling services available, who didn't know that BSU even had an internship office for those who want to go above and beyond. So including information on these resources can really help students manage their workload as well as manage their future careers. Offer specific study tips to students. If you go to the OTL resources webpage in the internet page, there are handouts on the study cycle and Bloom's taxonomy, learning strategies and developing a pre-course inventory, tips for student note-taking. These can also be useful if you have students in your class who are working as note takers for the class or for students with disabilities in the classroom. Number 4, avoid busy work and focus on student engagement. If you overload yourself on formative assessments, you're going to overload yourself and you're going to overload your students. Busy work doesn't help anybody. Focus on student engagement, focus on in-class group activities for synchronous classes and group activities for that can be done asynchronously as well, such as Padlets, discussion boards, etc. But stick to one if you can, Melissa. I'm looking at you. So, and then that brings us to, of course, manage your online pedagogical tools carefully. I think if there's one thing that we need to remember for both student workload and for our own workload, there's this great quote by David Allen: "You can do anything, but not everything." And that's an important thing for us to know. So that's sort of my little spiel. We still have some great resources in the chat from Renee, from others, academic coaching, student resources, all of these wonderful things. So before my 6-year-old breaks in, as he's just about to do, I wanted to open the floor for anyone who has any last minute questions. It's okay, sweetheart, come here, what's up?
I just wanted to say
Come here.
I really hope I did good on English test. It said I had a 1 and then a 1-7. And I hope not 1-7 is how many I got wrong.
We'll see. Come here. I need a hug.
Hi.
All right, Daddy's got to finish up his workshop.
Okay. Wait, workshop?
Leave the light on, please. Thank you. That is on me for not locking the door. So I just wanted to take our last couple of minutes and open up the floor for anybody who else who had any other questions or comments that they wanted to add.
I guess one quick thing that I also found helped reduce my workload is when I got buried in my grading, I actually took one of my lab assignments and let students grade it as a class. So I gave them the answer key and said, look, here's the answer to number 1. Anybody not understand that? Let's discuss it. So it actually, I think, kind of helped because I could see parts where people were having trouble and they could ask me questions in the moment. They could, sometimes their peers jumped in with like a different explanation. So maybe just offloading some of the grading onto the students could help.
Yeah, peer review is a great resource for reducing faculty workload. We have to be careful that it doesn't increase student workload beyond a manageable threshold. But students love to get engaged in that way. One of the things that I did for a couple of my classes last semester is I actually worked with students synchronously in class to help students collectively build their own final exam. And what I got from that was I got a very, very positive response because number 1, it shows that faculty care about students' impact and care about what they have to say. It allows students to focus in specifically on what they want to take away from the class, what's going to be most valuable in this class when they move on into other classes at BSU or move into their career afterwards. And those are sort of the questions that I open up when students are building their final, of all the stuff we've covered in this class, what's most important to you? What do you care about? What are you going to take with you outside of this classroom? And then that helps me build the final to the specifications that the students want. So that's just one other possible suggestion, but that focuses more on student engagement rather than workload. So.
One thing that I did was turn my reading questions into a Microsoft form just to reduce my workload because I had more students than ever this semester and I'm part-time. And I'm like a little freaked out how I'm going to manage all that, but that's another story. So that was my thought. And I'm not a big quiz person, but I'm going to try it out.
There you go.
Yay. I wasn't focusing on the English test.
We'll talk about it in a second, sweetheart. All right, folks. So it is now 1 o'clock. So thank you all so very much for your joining us today for our first Office of Teaching and Learning workshop. We're very excited that you've taken this opportunity to join us and to focus on your teaching and learning here at BSU. And I hope that you can look forward to other really fun and exciting and useful activities and workshops moving forward for the spring semester. So thank you all very much.